This is Success Mentorship class number 128, and the topic is the 4 stages of life. Everything has a stage, and I want to read one of the spiritual principles, I think, that really sums it up, written thousands of years ago, and it says, "To everything there is a season, and a time for every purpose under the heavens, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pick up that which is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to get and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace." And that so aptly sums it up, that everything in life operates on a vibration, on a frequency, in a season. And when we look at our lives, we have seasons in our lives. There are basically 4 seasons in our lives, and I'm going to share what they are, and then we're going to go into the details of each one, because it's important to understand the impact and the things in that season that are important, and then to look at how to maximize your ability to use the variables of that season to create the next level in your life. So the first season of life is the season of education. And here you learn what it's all about. The second season of life is the season of sensation and experience. And here you learn how it feels, how it looks, how it smells, how it moves. The third stage of life is the stage of power. And here you learn how to do, what to do, why to do, and you do it. The fourth stage of life is the stage of immortality. And here you look at what is your impact on the world? What was the purpose for your being? Here you look at the impact, the footprint, the vibration that you leave on the planet, on the consciousness once you move on to a next elevation. So let's begin to look into each one of these 4 levels of consciousness, these 4 stages of life, because each one represents a level of consciousness. And so in this first stage of life, we're talking generally from the time really before you're born, because the education of beingness begins at the moment of conception, the moment you plug into that universal vibration of life. And so from that point until age 20 or 25 is that stage of education. And it is during this stage that you learn the basic, fundamental, and the rules of life. You formulate, you learn about, and you accept a value system. You get the basic instruction in thinking, in reading, in writing, in counting, in logic, in decision making. This is so important, because these first 20 years of life becomes the foundation on which we base the rest of our life. One of the interesting things about the stages of life is that they're cumulative. And so anything that you do not master in a prior stage will definitely come back to bite you later on, because the essence is toward perfection, toward completion. And so therefore it's critical that you master each one of the lessons at each stage of life. So in this education stage, you generally lay the foundation, your thoughts, your attitudes, your emotions. You learn about that basic attitude that you have toward yourself. So often as children, our education is so dependent on other people that we have to really know and hope and pray and think that early period of instruction comes from someone who knows, who has your interests at heart. In this first stage, you begin to develop self-confidence or fear. You develop faith or doubt. You develop cowardice or courage. And this idea that this main challenge is that this education comes from other people is that you as a child have very little input at this stage in life. And so the ideas, the morals, the values, the habits come to you through other people, your parents, teachers, ministers. Any symbol of authority has an impact on you. And based on this level of vibration, as a child, if these vibrations, if these lessons, these teachings are not good for you, you have no defense against it. So as a child, if you were raised in an environment of criticism, of negativity, of insecurity, where there was no stability. I was reading about one of our politicians, and he said that during his first 12 years of school, he and his family moved 7 times. And so in this first stage of life, it is so critical about the person or persons who are teaching you. We have a friend who had polio, and years later when we saw her daughter walked the same way that her mother had walked with the polio, with the braces on her leg. And I said to Sandra, I said, I wonder, did the daughter have polio also? No. But she learned to walk based on how she saw her mother walk. Her mother walked with that thing of having braces on her legs, and the daughter walked the same way. And so in this first stage of life, it is critical because anything that is not mastered, for example, if a child does not learn the value system of honesty, of truth, and we all know it, as children, we tend to lie and steal, do all those little things, but we learn the value system of how to respond and how to act from the teachers around us, from our parents, from those who impact us. And so this first stage of life is critical because if it is based on negativity, if it is based on criticism, if it is based on lack of love, if it is based on pain and fear, then that vibration is carried through, not just to the next level of life, but through the entire life. If this foundation is built on truth, honesty, love, faith, discipline, confidence, and compassion, in other words, all of the positive attributes of life, then nothing is impossible. If this stage of life is built on negative attributes of fear, jealousy, lack of honesty, then it can be a serious impediment to future growth. The watchword for this first stage of life is learn, practice, master. Now, as parents, knowing this, as not only as parents, but as adults knowing this process, these 4 stages, people may go through at different points of their lives. Sometimes you'll meet people who had a very tragic first stage of their lives, and you may be the person to help get them back on track. And so even if you don't have kids, it's important to understand the fact that this first stage of life, some of the key principles are learning, modeling, and teaching. And so very often, the greatest contribution we can make to another person is to model right thinking, right behaviors, right emotions, right relationships. That second stage of life, now the stage of sensation and experience, and this is the reason we named this topic, Are You Stuck in the Second Stage of Life? And the reason is many of us, men and women, get stuck in the second stage of life. In the second stage of life, you begin to find out things about yourself. It's often, this is from 20 to 40, 25 to 50 years old. It is often during this period that you strike out on your own, that you face the challenges of an adult reality, that you learn to experience the things that feel good, that taste good. You experience love, you experience sex, you experience drugs, you experience emotions. You experience competition, insecurity, outrageous success, tragic failure. You experience frustration, disappointment. All of the vast array of things that can happen, you begin to experience in the second stage of life, because in the second stage of life is where you are literally, if you were a bird, this is when the mother bird kicks you from the nest. But it's also in this second stage of life that so many people get stuck for a major portion of their lives. It's so easy to get hooked on a feeling. One of the spiritual principles is that feeling gets the blessing. So how you feel determines the vibration that you send out onto the universe, and thus determines the things that you attract into your life experience. And so if you feel insecure about yourself, if you feel negative about yourself, this is the vibration that you will send out to the universe. And that universe will bring things to you, people to you, experiences to you that are congruent with that feeling. So this second stage of life is critical, because it's in this stage that our life habits really begin to either make you or break you. It is in this second stage that we must learn to control our thoughts, to control our emotions, to control our appetites, to control our actions, to control the type of people we permit to come into our lives. It is in this stage of life, this second stage, that a very adult reality begins to manifest, and that's the riddle of survival. You see, as children, our parents handled everything. They pay the rent, they pay the mortgage, they take care of stuff. All as children, our real job is just to learn, practice, and master the things that our parents are teaching us. But when you get into that second stage of life and you're out of the net, it's now time for you to deal with your life. It's now that time for you to deal with food, clothing, and shelter. What does it take to keep a roof over your head, food on the table? How do you have the time, the energy, the resources to create the life that you want to live? This is one of those treadmills that we can get stuck on. So many of us get so focused on the riddle of survival, on the riddle of just doing whatever it takes to maintain our lives at a particular level so that we don't suffer or experience pain. In the second stage of life, for example, if we don't develop the discipline of our thinking, the discipline of our emotions, the discipline of our habits, the discipline of our relationships, it can be a very bumpy road. When we look at the financial aspect, in this second stage, if you don't develop a financial program where you generate the maximum amount of income, where you save the maximum amount of income, where you invest the maximum amount, and where you create a body of wealth that can take care of you in later stages of life. We often talk about the fact that if you start investing $100 a month at the age 20, then by the time you're 60, you could possibly be a millionaire. So it is in this second stage that we learn the discipline and the mastery of what it takes to live a meaningful life. It's very interesting, the difference between men and women. Men will often get stuck in this second stage on the level of the consciousness of competition, of wielding power, of being in charge of, in other words, those emotional variations that symbolize power, strength, ego. Women tend to get stuck in this session, in this stage, in search of love, in search of attention, in search of affection. And if we look at what is the second stage really about, it's really about searching for a particular feeling, a feeling that empowers you to move on and do what you were destined to do. As parents, if we don't prepare our children properly in that first stage of life, you know, one of the challenges as a parent is that we try to do too much for our children. We don't want our children to suffer the way we did. But it was not about the suffering. Everything we do in life is about a lesson. And so when we look at being a parent, it's more about not so much protecting the child, but preparing the child for what we know is about to come. It's unrealistic that we can always shelter them, and there often comes a time in which we've made our transition, and it is our obligation to make sure that in our stages of life, that we impart to our children the proper information so that they can move through their stages peacefully. Even as adults, we'll meet people who are stuck in this second stage of life, and we can help them by being a model. You know, sometimes you get stuck in that second stage because of something that's missing in the first stage. And I'm sure many of you have experienced situations where someone you know comes up to you and they say, wow, thank you so much. And you say, well, what did I do? Well, just for being you, for doing the things you do. So, well, I don't know, what do you mean? You know, I saw how you confronted a challenge. And in confronting that challenge, you stood strong, you stood tall, and you achieved victory. Excuse me. That was an inspiration to me. So many of us at this point in our lives, it may be a part of our mission to be an example to others so that they can see how we live our lives, how we handle challenges and disappointments to help other people get through to where they need to go. The key word about the key concepts about the second stage of life is feelings, understanding, and choices. The third stage of life is the stage of power. And this is generally from about 40 to 60 years old, 50 to 75. But this is where, in this third stage, it all comes together. It's during this third stage of life that you achieve your greatest success. It's also when you experience your greatest failures. Having mastered the basics of life, having mastered your appetites and emotions, then it is during this third stage of life that you can focus on your goals and your mission and the vision. It is in this stage of life that you learn how to reach down deep into your core to do what must be done. It is in this stage of life that you really begin to not just understand faith, but to begin to feel the power of faith, the ability to experience the substance of things hoped for and to create the evidence of things not seen. In this stage of power, you begin to realize that the essence of power is to multiply it. The essence of power is to multiply and impart that power to others so that the harmonic can make the power grow. It is in this stage that we experience the great test of our lives. When we look at great men, great women, it is often we see where great tests, great challenges came upon them, and still they were able to be victorious. So in this stage of power, your true mettle comes out. The reality adjustment that you have to make can be made because you know to keep your eye on the prize. You see, in this third stage of life, it's so important to be focused on your goals, your purpose, your vision, the destiny, the thing that you're supposed to do. It is in this stage of life that you consolidate all of your powers. And so the watchwords are the keys to this third stage of life is action, because it's about what you do. It's faith. It's about having that source of power, and about persistence, to be able to hang in there until it's done. The fourth stage of life is the stage of immortality. And this is generally from 60 to 80, 75 to 100. And here in this fourth stage of life, you have mastered the prior stages. You've mastered the learning. You've mastered the emotions. You've mastered the power of taking action. In this stage in life, you really become focused on why you are here. You begin to evaluate the donations, the contributions you've made to the world, and then you have that deep desire to do more, to give more. In this stage of immortality, the way that you share the blessings that you have received is by sharing them and giving to others. In this age of immortality, you're able to reach down and summons up the forces and vibrations that you can act upon, that you can emulate in the present, which creates a vibration that continues past the time of your transition. In this fourth stage of life, you become so centered on your vision, your purpose, and you ask yourself, why am I here? And so often you're here to be a model for someone else. There's an interesting principle that many times your purpose is to be something for someone else, to be a resource, to be a model. In this fourth stage of life, this stage of immortality, it becomes totally clear why perfection is important, why that idea of getting better every day in every way is so important. In this fourth stage of life now, your concern is about your legacy, what you would like to leave for the world, for your children, for your family, for everybody on the planet. When we look at these four stages of life, we gave some time variations. There's certain people, though, that go through these four stages very quickly. In other words, these stages are really stages of vibration. They're not necessarily time periods. Time periods are a good way to look at them because everything has a season, and the season of life, those birth to 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 to 80. These time periods are like, you might say, averages, how things normally work. But there are people who create such a vibration within them that they alter the time period. You look at a Joan of Arc, and she went through all four stages of life by the time she was 19 years old. Think about this. You know, we read about Joan of Arc, but think about the consciousness of the world at the time that she came about. We're talking medieval times, really. At that time, for the world to give the power of controlling the army to a woman, she must have had some awesome powers in a world where women were only property. And of course, the world responded by burning her at the stake because they realized how powerful she was. But she went through those four stages in 19 years. Dr. Martin Luther King, and look at his work. He went through the four stages in 39 years, so that by the time he made his transition, he was literally, his impact and the destiny, his effect on the world had been solidly cemented in truth and in reality. So when we look at these four stages of life, I wanted to point it out to us because as we come through these challenging periods, it's important to know where we are. And it's important to have this idea of putting it all together to create a harmonic being now that can move on better toward our destiny. So when we master that first stage of life, when we learn, practice, and master the thoughts, the emotions, the morals, the consciousness of that first stage of life, we create a solid foundation for ourselves. When we master that second stage of life by taking control of our feelings, taking control of our emotions, and making right choices so that we can get right results. When we understand the power that we possess, that third stage of life where we have the ability to make things happen, where we have the ability to pull people together, where we have the ability to do whatever is necessary to accomplish the goal, to realize the vision. And when we master that fourth stage of life where it's about sharing. Someone said you never see a U-Haul behind a hearse. The idea is that your works live on long beyond the time of your existence. Before I close, I'd like to really pay tribute to one of my dear friends who made his transition last week, Bishop James Utley. And he was a person who exemplified the process and the progress through those four stages of life. And as he made his transition, I was very focused on his legacy and his process and the impact that he had on the young people by being that go-to person that they could talk to and that he could translate their feelings into communications with the power system. So just this lesson, the four stages of life, I think is a tribute to my friend, Bishop James Utley, for living the process with great dignity and impact. And so, my friends, today, when you can master these four stages of life and recognize where you are in each stage and then do the things that must be done. And that's one of the reasons that we share our book. When we wrote the 12 Universal Laws of Success, it was intended to be a resource for people who were on the journey, who wanted to do what they wanted to do, be what they wanted to be, have whatever they wanted to have. And this was the toolbox to help them get there. So when you can understand these principles, when you can use the tools that are available to you, then you can truly live your life by design and create your life exactly the way you want it to be. And so it is, always knowing that the best is yet to come.